From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister D'Souza. This is your roundup of the week's biggest stories shaping the United States and beyond. Welcome to Washington Watch.
We also meet at a time when India is confronting the challenge of terrorism, one that is a shared threat to the international community.
The largest escalation in decades between India and Pakistan, both nuclear-armed nations. India began military strikes this week on targets in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, believed to be terror infrastructure. In return, Pakistan responded with strikes on India. India's military action comes in reaction to a deadly terror attack on tourists in Pahalgam last month. The US has called for immediate de-escalation.
Today's agreement with the UK is the first in a series of agreements on trade that my administration has been negotiating over the past 4 weeks.
The US and the UK have agreed to the framework of a trade deal, with many of the details still left to be ironed out. However, it's the first to come in a series of agreements the White House hopes to nail since imposing tariffs on various countries. The US agreed to roll back duties imposed on British steel and cars in exchange for purchasing Boeing planes and getting American farmers greater access to UK markets. Despite the agreement, most UK goods will still be subject to 10% duties.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale.
Canada's newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney firmly saying Canada is not for sale. Trump's reply, never say never. On the whole, though, Carney's visit to the White House was mostly amicable. Trump praised Carney, calling him a terrific guy. Carney also turned to flattery at times. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Russia. He, along with 20 other international leaders, were hosted by Russian President Putin. They attended a massive parade in Moscow that marked the Soviet Union's World War II victory over Nazi Germany. China and Russia have vowed to strengthen ties to counter US influence. The first American Pope is elected to lead the Catholic Church. Robert Prevost, who was born in Chicago, lived and worked in Peru as a missionary for several years. He eventually obtained dual citizenship. Prevost, who will now go on to be known by the name of Pope Leo XIV, has occasionally posted some messages on social media that appear to be critical of President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. Our top story, tensions between India and Pakistan escalating to new heights this week. India on Wednesday, under the codename of Operation Sindoor, unleashed 24 missiles in 25 minutes on 9 terror bases in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. This was in response to the Pahalgam attack in Kashmir that killed 26 people. Now, Pakistan's armed forces launched intense shelling on the line of control and the international border in Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab and Rajasthan. Here's what Indian officials had to say.
Along the international border and line of control, drone intrusions were attempted from Leh to Sar Creek at 36 locations with approximately 300 to 400 drones. Indian Armed Forces brought down a number of these drones using kinetic and non-kinetic means.
Instead of owning up to these attacks, Pakistan made the preposterous and outrageous claim that it was the Indian Armed Forces and the Indian Air Force that was targeting cities like Amritsar and trying to put the blame on Pakistan.
Now, civilians in Poonch, Jammu have condemned Pakistan's intense shelling targeting locals in the cross-border firings. My colleague Mohammad Ghazali reports on the aftermath from Poonch.
Right now here at Gurdwara Singh Sabha in Poonch district, behind me, if you can see those hilltop, and behind that hilltop, we have got the international border. And why we are reporting from here, this is the kind of destruction the Gurdwara has faced due to the shelling. The Poonch is one of those border districts which is facing intense shelling for the last 3-4 days since India started its retaliation against the Pahalgam attack. And this Gurdwara has also faced the brunt. And this led to around 16 people who were killed. So right now the situation is tense, but the people here say that Pakistan's deliberate targeting of civilian installations, Gurdwara Sahib, a place of worship, is something which shows off its nefarious design to even create communal discord in the country. I'm joined here by the chief preacher, or what we call the Granthi of this Gurdwara Sahib. We'll try to understand that what is the situation here, because many people also believe that perhaps the vital installations, army installations in and around this area could be the reason why Pakistan keeps firing, and it could be a hit and miss both. But this is what I've picked up after speaking to these people. जी जी कोई बात नहीं, ये बताएं प्रधान जी कि क्या सिचुएशन, आप भी आ जाएं तो जी, तो ये कब हुआ था ये और कितने लोगों की जानें चली गई थी?
ये 7 तारीख को सुबह 7:30 बजे 7 बजे हमारे गुरुद्वारे साहब में जो डेली रूटीन के मुताबिक जो कीर्तन की समाप्ति होती है, यहाँ पर लगभग 100 के करीब संगत थी, लेकिन 15 मिनट के बाद 7:30 बजे पाकिस्तान की तरफ से मोटर आके गिरता है, जिससे ये गुरुद्वारे साहब को बहुत बड़ा नुकसान हुआ है। हमारे जो यहाँ के हेड रागी थे भाई अमरीक सिंह जी, वो 10 मिनट पहले यहाँ से घर जाते हैं तो वहाँ पर उनकी भी शहादत हो जाती है। और इस किलिंग में पाकिस्तान ने इनोसेंट जो लोग थे हमारे, उन पे फायर किया और सिविलियन पे वार की, जिससे हमारे लगभग 13 लोग जो शहादत प्राप्त कर गए।
Meanwhile, the US is closely monitoring the increased hostilities between the two countries, urging de-escalation from the president to the vice president. It's all been closely watched here in the United States.
I get along with both. I know both very well, and I want to see them work it out. I want to see them stop. And hopefully they can stop now. And if I can do anything to help, I will be there.
What we can do is try to encourage these folks to de-escalate a little bit, but we're not going to get involved in the middle of war that's fundamentally none of our business and has nothing to do with America's ability to control it.
In both calls, the Secretary emphasized the need for immediate de-escalation and called for an end to the violence. He expressed U.S. support for direct dialogue between India and Pakistan and encouraged continued efforts to improve communications.
Now, in the past, the U.S. has helped diffuse tensions between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. In the Kargil War of 1999, U.S. intelligence suggested Pakistan was toying with the idea of a nuclear option. An intense meeting took place between Bill Clinton and Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Pakistan backed off, and that opened the door to closer U.S.-India ties. Now, after the 2001 attack on the Indian Parliament, it was the Bush administration's turn that put pressure on Pakistan General Pervez Musharraf. It finally helped thaw an Indian reprisal. Now, in the recent attack in 2019, after the Pulwama attacks, the previous Trump administration firmly told Pakistan to deny supporting terror groups. But how effective could the US be in de-escalating tensions now, with DC preoccupied with conflicts with Washington preoccupied with conflicts like those in Gaza and Ukraine? Let's take a closer look at that. Joining us now from New Jersey is retired Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan from the Indian Army. Also joining us from this is a South Asian analyst, Michael Kogelman at the Wilson Center, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Narasimhan, let me come to you first. How would you describe the current Trump administration's handling of the tensions between India and Pakistan?
Thank you very much for getting me on your show. I would like to say 2 points on this. One, if you look at Mr. Trump's statement and Mr. Vance's statement, it gives one picture. And if you look at Secretary Marco Rubio's interactions with our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, and the Prime Minister of Pakistan to scale down the efforts by both the sides, is something that, again, that gives a different picture. So it can be open to interpretation. But my own understanding is, I think the US is invested in this particular issue, and they are trying to bring down the levels of action and reaction that is going on between India and Pakistan. That is the way I see it as the initial remark. Later on, as we go along, I'll take on further questions.
Sure. Mr. Kugelman, how would you react to what Mr. Narasimhan just said there about J.D. Vance's statement? Because he says that the US won't get involved in the middle of a war that's fundamentally none of the US's business.
Well, certainly, at first glance, what Vance said recently appears to be quite different from his earlier comments during this crisis, including one he made in a call with Prime Minister Modi, in which he said the U.S. would provide all assistance to India and in the joint fight against terrorism. This suggests that he's saying that there could be limits in terms of what the U.S. would do. But I actually don't. I think that there's consistency here. He essentially said that the U.S. wants to see de-escalation, and that has been the main message from this administration since that horrific attack in Kashmir on April 22nd. So I think that perhaps what Vance was trying to do was to limit expectations. Maybe he was trying to say that the U.S. could not guarantee that it would be in a position to help bring an end to this crisis, but that it wants to be a part of efforts to seek de-escalation. And finally, I think that Vance was also articulating a core principle of the Trump administration's foreign policy, and that's that it does not want to get dragged into other countries' wars. It doesn't want to be involved in wars, and it really wants to have less of a footprint, less of a global footprint than has been the norm for U.S. administrations.
Indeed, and some saying that Vance, they're appealing to his MAGA base as well, take care of America first. Mr. Narasimhan, let's look at the latest US State Department's press release. It said both Pakistan and India need to de-escalate. On the surface, it seems like a very firm statement to both countries, India and Pakistan. But if you read the last line in its statement about Pakistan, it says that the US reiterates for Pakistan to take concrete steps to end the support for terrorist groups. Is this a clearer sign, a signal, do you think, that Washington is calling out Pakistan once again on terror?
Absolutely. I think it's a well-known fact. Even the previous Trump administration, as you mentioned earlier, had called out Pakistan during an earlier incident in 2019 in Pulwama. So similar one, I think I can see that similar reaction here from the State Department on this. I think Pakistan has been called out to reduce the support, to stop that support to terrorism. That is the basic premise on which we are also basing our reactions. We are saying we are not wanting to escalate. The escalation is actually depending on Pakistan, and our interactions in this particular issue will continue based on the support from Pakistan being stopped for terrorism and terrorist activities from Pakistan soil. That is the way I see it. I think it is a clear calling out by the State Department of Pakistan to stop supporting terrorism.
Well, Mr. Kugelman, what leverage behind the scenes does the US really have to help de-escalate? The US is close to India and has, of course, historic ties with Pakistan. What's the carrot and stick approach that we might expect in the coming days?
Well, I would argue that the U.S. may not have as much leverage as some other potential mediators might, such as countries in the Arab Gulf like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar, which have very strong relations with both India and Pakistan and supply both countries with energy and other products, which I think gives them some leverage that the U.S. Does not have, even though the U.S. certainly is a key supplier of various products to India and Pakistan as well. But I think that the idea with the U.S. is that there's a history, a past precedent, as was noted in your report earlier, of mediating to seek de-escalation during these crises, including in 2019, when the first Trump administration was in power. And I think the idea is that this is the U.S., a superpower that has that level of gravitas and can bring something to the table. But again, and maybe Vance was trying to set these expectations, there might be limits to the amount of influence that the Americans might have, particularly in a case like now when you have a very particularly serious crisis where neither side, India or Pakistan, might be receptive, at least at this point, to outside mediation.
Okay. Mr. Narasimhan, very quickly, we just have about 15 or 20 seconds here. Do you agree with that notion there that the US doesn't have as much leverage now as it did before?
I may not agree with that argument. I think US has got the same kind of influence on both India and Pakistan. The thing that Mr. Kogelman mentioned about the West Asian countries having a say, you find Iran having a visit to Pakistan and then to India. You also see Saudi Arabian foreign minister to Pakistan and back to India. So I think that effort is already on. I think that combined with what influence US has got, I think will have a good amount of influence on both the countries.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, there with very interesting and sometimes different perspectives. Appreciate your time here on Washington Watch. Let's get to other news now. Behind the headlines of a trade deal which US President Trump has positioned as a big win. It was announced in the Oval Office with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer patched in on speakerphone. The deal involves Britain dropping its tariffs on US beef, ethanol, sports equipment and other products. The UK will also buy $10 billion of Boeing airplanes. In return, the UK can export 100,000 cars to the US at that lower 10% tariff rather than the current 25% rate. Separately, steel from the UK will see zero tariffs, but under the framework, British goods in general still face higher tariffs when they come to the United States. Let's get you more on this story with Ari Hawkins. He's a news reporter at Politico who covers all things trade. Ari, thank you so much for your time here. Ari, too early to perhaps spot the champagne bottle here. This is, after all, a framework of a deal. There will be weeks of negotiations going ahead, correct?
Correct. And thank you so much for having me. This is not a traditional free trade agreement, which the U.S. typically takes at least 18 months to negotiate. Some take years or even longer. And during the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, there were some trade deals that never came to fruition. This is a broad, almost memo or framework that lays the groundwork for negotiations to go forward. It is a good signal that despite a lot of the distrust between the U.S. and other global partners, there is still this line of communication that's open. And we did see tangible concessions on both sides. We saw tariffs decrease. However, the most major stressors on the relationship, particularly that 10% tariff that is hitting the United Kingdom, that's not going anywhere. And the countries have quite a lot of more negotiations to do.
Ari, the big question in everyone's mind really here is how did the UK manage to get in front of the queue when getting this far with the US? It was just in the last week of April, for example, the Treasury Secretary said one of the first trade deals would be with India, but instead it's the UK that takes first place. So how did that happen?
Has always had a bit of a soft spot for the United Kingdom. We saw a very conciliatory discussion between the Prime Minister and the American president when the Prime Minister was in Washington. Those talks went well. The Trump administration praised the Prime Minister's, quote, beautiful accent. And the United Kingdom doesn't have a trade deficit with the U.S., and that's been a consistent stressor for the U.S. And in some ways, this deal was easier to navigate than others. Unlike India, the UK also didn't face higher reciprocal tariffs beyond that 10% mark, meaning that this will lay the groundwork for more deals to go forward. It was among the easier ones to negotiate. And it's worth noting that even though it was an easier one to negotiate, a lot of those most contentious disputes were unable to be resolved. That's not necessarily a positive signal for negotiations, particularly with other economies like in Asia,
right,
particularly as the Trump administration tries to peel economies away from China.
Ari, before we let you go very, very quickly here, what lessons can other countries learn from this, the likes of India, for example, for negotiations going ahead?
There's quite a few lessons to learn. One of the primary points here is that this will be a long negotiation. There will have to be concessions. There will have to be public statements that indicate that talks are going well, that the Trump administration is able to negotiate, and clear, concrete concessions that countries are able to make and make very publicly. We saw that the UK has signaled that it is ready to negotiate on a number of different disputes, but it has praised both the negotiations between the countries as well as the Trump administration and its staff's ability to get this done.
Ari Hawkins, political reporter or trade reporter at Political, thank you very much for your time here on Washington Watch. In other news now, this week saw yet another high-stakes meeting at the White House, this time between Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and US President Donald Trump, who has spent the last few months lambasting his northern neighbor. Yet, while many were expecting another fiery showdown at the Oval Office, what we saw instead was a meeting between leaders looking at resetting ties. Disha Bakshi has these details.
We're going to be friends with Canada. Regardless of anything, we're going to be friends with Canada. I love Canada.
After a resounding election victory on an anti-Trump platform, many thought that when Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney came face-to-face with US President Donald Trump, it could only result in one thing, a fiery clash. Yet President Trump, who spent months belittling Canada with his annexation threat, had a very different tone towards Washington's once close ally. President Trump played nice with the Canadian leader, softening his one hostile tone, from calling lambasting Canada to now expressing his love for America's neighbor. Canada's Mark Carney had one goal: to reiterate that Canada is not going to become the 51st US state and avoid a public fight while doing so. And he seems to have succeeded, using praise and a firm stance to push his points across.
Said that Canada should become the 51st state.
Yeah. No. Well, I still believe that, but you know, it takes two to tango, right?
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
They have. I must say, Canada is stepping up the military participation because Mark knew, you know, they were low, and now they're stepping it up, and that's a very important thing. But never say never. Never say never.
Despite Trump's never-say-never retort, the US and Canada look to be on the path of resetting ties. Over the past 2 months, the two countries have been struggling in a trade war, sparked by US President Trump's tariff hikes, many of which do not comply with the North American Free Trade Agreement. Carney, like many other world leaders, hopes to quickly negotiate a bilateral trade agreement that could very well reduce the impact of American duties. This encounter comes at a crucial time and could guide other leaders manage Trump's trade demands, including Australian PM Anthony Albanese, who, much like Carney, also won polls on an anti-Trump platform. With sides pleased with the encounter, only time will tell what this means for US-Canada ties. With Disha Bakshi, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
Here's a quick wrap of some other stories from the United States.
Tensions flared at the Columbia University as dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters were arrested after they occupied part of the main library on Wednesday. The protesters forced their way into the Butler Library, leaving at least 2 security officers injured. The university president has called protesters' actions outrageous. There doesn't seem to be an end to the Trump versus Harvard fight. This as the US government announced it would block the country's oldest university from receiving any new federal research grants. The move signals a sharp escalation in Trump's campaign to remake higher education and isolate institutions that resist.
We just informed them a little while ago, and all action is stopping.
US President Donald Trump has said that Washington would stop bombing Yemen's Houthis, adding that the Iran-backed group had agreed to stop interrupting important shipping lanes in the Middle East. While the announcement did not mention the ongoing Houthi attacks on Israel, the Houthis have pledged that such strikes would continue. Well, the Americans could be faced with significant tax rate increase as Trump is coaxing lawmakers to increase rates on them. This is the government's bid to offset other cuts in its signature economic package. According to reports, the proposal calls for creating a new 39.6% tax bracket for individuals earning at least $2.5 million or couples making $5 million. Carla Hayden, the first woman and the first African American to be Librarian of Congress, has been abruptly fired by Donald Trump. This as the White House continues to evict those perceived to oppose the president and his agenda. Hayden, whose 10-year term was set to expire next year, was notified about her removal through an email late on Thursday. She had come under backlash from a conservative advocacy group that had in fact vowed to root out those standing in the way of Trump's agenda.
That's it for Washington Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza.